We're now on Daf Samach Vav Amud Beis. We're studying the Shita of the Chachamim, and they say Ein or Lashon Koli El Dover Acher. In other words, we're not going to immediately take the barley after we reap it and put it over the fire, because the concept of Koli means that there's got to be something in between the reaping and the fire. Something has to happen in between. And that's called, in the argument of the Chachamim, Ein Lashon Koli El Dover Kolil. Now, the word Kolil means something shiny, meaning you've got to put it into a vessel that happens to be shiny because it's made of copper, and that's going to separate it from the Aish. So you don't put it directly into the fire, you reap it, it's collected in baskets, and then you take it and put it into a pipe, and that pipe will go over the fire. Ha Ketzad, Abuv Shel Kloyos, the first, partial, the first kernels of barley, Shel Kloyos Hayusham. Right, we said that kloyos means they have to be toasted or parched. And then there's an aviv. Aviv, we said, was a pipe, shiny pipe made of copper. Menukav kikivra. It was a perforated pipe so that some of the fire would go into the perforations and parch the kernels of barley. And the Brisa compares it to a kavra, which is a sieve. Kadeshatea or sholetis bekulo. Right? So since you had a perforation throughout the entire pipe, then the fire would be able to extend all over the entire kernels of barley. Now, afterwards, it says, Aviv kalui geresh. What's geresh? Literally translated, geresh means coarsely ground. It's not finely ground, but coarsely ground. Eini yodea im aviv kalui, im geresh kalui. I don't know exactly at what point you're going to do the parching over the fire. Should we do it kalui immediately after you cut down the barley and you reap it? Or maybe kalui means geresh kalui, meaning you only toast it after you've already taken the barley, the kernels of barley, and crushed it into a flour. And the question is how we read the pasuk. It says kolui. Do we read it with aviv? And that means that before you grind the kernels, you already do the toasting. Or should we read it with geresh? So it means kolui geresh, meaning after it's geresh and it's already been crushed, then when you have flour, that's what requires toasting. Bakshu omer ba'esh hifsika inyan. So in other words, we're not going to toast it immediately. We're going to wait until after it's ground, and then we'll toast it. No, I'm sorry. Hifsik ha'inyan. Let me read it again. Hifsik ha'inyan. Rashi says the lokoya gerish. The lokoya gerish. So it's not referring to gerish after it was ground, but rather it's referring to koli and aviv. And koli and aviv means immediately after you reap it, that's when you put it in the pipe and you put it over the fire. So it means that the Aish here, the Ba'esh, separates the koli from the geresh. And basically it tells us that the barley should be toasted immediately before you grind it and make it into flour. Next, in the pasuk it says caramel, and we're going to have a few different interpretations to what the word caramel means. The first of which is rach umal. Right, it's got to be soft and crushable. So that means that the barley for the omer should be soft and easily squeezed. V'cheinu omer, and I want to prove this from another pasuk. And this pasuk, I believe, is in Malachim. Let me just double check. Yeah, Malachim Beis. The ish ba mi Baal Shlosha, from a place called Baal Shlosha. Vayaveli ish Elokim, he brought to Elisha Novi lechem bikurim, esrim lechem siorim ve'karmel bitzikol. So he brings from the first crop 20 loaves of barley bread, fresh kernels in their husks. Vayomer, and Elisha declares, Tein la'am v'ochelu. Right? Apparently, the food somehow sufficed for 100 students of Elisha at the time of a ra'av, of a famine. That was a great miracle. But he came, v'yatzak lonu, v'achalnu. Okay, so this ish mi baal shlosha, right? He says he's going to pour out the food for us, meaning we're very hungry during this famine, and we'll eat it. V'nova hayir, it was very good. Okay, now here we have what's called no triquid, because it says ish ba, so that's the base of ba, and then it says v'yatzak. We're going to take the tzadi and the kuf, and then the lamed of lanu, and the vav v'achalnu, v'nova hayu nun vav. And then we get the word bitsiklono. So what's the bitsiklono, which we got from Bovi Yatzakulanu, Vyachalnu, Vinavahoy, bitsiklono. Okay, I guess we're just darshaning. It says bitsiklono, and we're darshaning from that word that he came and he fed us and we ate it. It was good. The Omer. Here's another pasuk. Nis also be ohavim. Pasuk in Mishlei. So now we're going to darshan the word nis also. Nisa v'nitein v'na'ale v'nismach v'nischate be'olim. Okay, this is a description apparently of some illicit relationship. Anyway, so all these, like just like we said, Carmel means rach umol. So we took the word apart into two sections. And the Gemara is bringing now, in the name of this price, of many, many examples where we take a word and we divide it up into many words. Like, for example, we started with bitsiklo no, and now we got to nis al sa. The Omer in another example is going to be kanaf rinanim ne'elasa. And again, ne'elasa means no say. We're talking about a bird by the name of kanaf rinanim. It carries its eggs. Ola, it ascends up to the nest, v'nischata, and then it comes down and deposits the egg in the nest. The Omer, another example. Kiarat. So again, the previous example was from Eov, and now we have an example from the Torah itself, from Bamidbar. Kiarat haderech linegdi. This is in Balak. And what does the word yarat mean? We expound it to mean your asa rasa notasa. I think we're referring to the donkey. Let me just make sure if he says it in a ah. Bilam's mule saw the angel blocking the way ahead with a sword in his hand, and it veered off the path. Okay, fine. Now we have another pshat in Carmel. Until now, we said Carmel divides up into two Rach Umol. Now we have the Bei Rabbi Shmuel Tana, Carmel Kar Mole. Kar is a pillow, Mole it's full, and it means that the kernel of barley should be entirely ripe to the point that it completely fills the husk, resembling a stuffed pillow. Okay. Now we get into the Zroim part of this. Right, we had flour that was left over from the Omer, and now we have to, in order to allow eating it, not only poda it, but also we have to be mafresh challah. Rabbi Akiva machai b'challah u'b'masos. Rabbi Akiva says it's not enough to take off challah, which is truma, right? And you also have to take off maseh. Omer of Kahana, Omer hoy Rabbi Akiva, meruach hegdesh eno poter. In order to be chayv maser, you knew what's called meruach. You have to winnow it and then smooth it out on a kri. And the meruach has to be done by a bar chiyuva, someone who's obligated to maser. In this case, the refined flour for the omer, and now we're talking about the excess, is owned by hegdesh. So now whoever does the miruach is really representing hegdesh, and according to Rabbi Akiva, miruach hegdesh eno poter, meaning that we view hegdesh as a private ownership. It's like lahavdil elef havdolas. The Vatican issues its own coins, its own money. So hegdesh also is an ownership. It's an enterprise. And therefore, it's almost as if it's a private ownership. That's according to Rabbi Akiva. Hence, Yechayv Maser. Moser Rav Sheshes, I'm going to prove to you, says Rav Sheshes, that even Rabbi Akiva agrees that Meruach Hegdesh Poter. And we're going to have to come up with another explanation why Rabbi Akiva holds Yechayv Maser. The Brisa says, Mosar Sholosh Se'in Halolu, right? You brought 3 se'in for the Omer, and you don't need all of it for the Akrova. So what do you do with the Mosar, with the remainders? The excess? Mayu Osimbo Nifte. It has Kedushas Domim. So it's subject to Pidyon. Now anyone can even chayav, according to the Tanakama, Bechala upotim in a maser. And Rabbi Akiva machayev bechala ubemaser. Amru lo. So the Chachamim argued against Rabbi Akiva. Podem miyad gizbar yochia. Well, the halacha is that if you podem grain, ordinary grain, we're not talking about omer, and it was kadosh lemigdash, chayev bechalu potim in a maser. So the Chacham are arguing against Rabbi Akiva. How can you say Yechayiv b'maser in the excess of the Omer? After all, it has the status of Kiddushas Domim, and the Miruach is done on behalf of Hegdesh, and Miruach Hegdesh, Potter. It doesn't generate a Chiyuv Maser. Says Rav Sheshes v'yim Isa, if you're going to tell me, as we saw the name of Kahana, that according to Rabbi Akiva, Meruach Hegdesh Eino Poter, is my Ka'amrile. what were the Chachamim saying by bringing the example from regular, grains, ordinary grains that were sanctified, that were given to the Hegdish? I mean, you're just repeating the same thing over and over again. He. I mean, what's the difference between regular grains that you are potter from Hegdish and you potter from Maser because Meruach Hegdish poter, and the case of the Omer? I mean, it's exactly the same. Just as Rabbi Kiva who rejected the Omer, right? And he said that Meruach Hegdesh Eino Poter, he's going to say the same thing by ordinary grains. So Mahu Ilu Chacham, what the Chacham gained by throwing that argument out. And therefore, we have to prove from the argument of the Chacham, and the Rabbi Kiva accepts that premise, namely that Meruach Hegdesh Poter. So we're going to have to come up then with an alternative explanation for Rabbi Akiva. But before we do that, we're going to again raise an objection against Rav Kahana's explanation of Rabbi Akiva that Meruach Hegdesh Eino Poter. The Oda Esvei Rav Kahana Bar Tachliv Rav Kahana Midasanya. Okay, we're not sure if this is a Bryce or not. Okay, it doesn't matter. Rabbi Akiva Mechayev B'chala Uva Masros L'fishlo Nitnu Mos El Tzorch Lahem. Oh, now Rabbi Akiva gives a whole different explanation as for why you chayev maser. It's not because you redeem that surplus and afterwards the Meruach is done by Hegdesh and Meruach Hegdesh Eino Poter, but rather because from the outset, when they designated 3 se'in for the purpose of the Omer, they only designated that which would be needed for the Omer, but that which would be a surplus, they never sanctified it from the get-go. It never became Hegdesh. El Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Talmud Orachu Befiv Shel Rabbi Akiva. He had a Masorah Rabbi Akiva through the generations. Shalom Nitnu Mos El Tzorch Lahem, that the money that they used to buy the 3 se'in in order to make it isaron, after they would crush it and make it into flour, then it was only litzarch, that which they needed, that which they gave the most for. In other words, when the most were designated for Hegdesh, only that which would be absolutely necessary was designated as Hegdesh. In other words, the bottom line of this whole sugya is that no one questions that the principle that Meruach Hegdesh is a poter. Even Rabbi Kiva agrees a poter. The reason why Rabbi Kiva says Yechayev Mas is because it's not a case of Meruach Hegdesh, but rather Shalom Nitnu Mos El Litzorach Lahem. Al Meruach Hegdesh in general is poter. Rava adds Meruach Akum, whether or not the Meruach of a guy is a poter or from maser or not, is the subject of Machlokes Tanoim Desanya. We have a brayso that says Tormin Mishal Yisrael Shal Yisrael. Okay, so this is a long, complicated brayso. We're going to just read it right now on the superficial level. So if you want to take truma from Ruvain's produce in order to pater up Shimon's produce, that's called Mishal Yisrael Shal Yisrael. That's fine. He says in the name of Rabbi Gershon that a Jew acquired 2 batches of untithed produce of Tevel, each from a different Jew. He took truma from one batch for the sake of the other, and the Bryce shows that the truma is valid. Mishal Ovi Kachavim, Mishal Ovi Kachavim, that's also valid. So what's the case of Mishal Oved Kochavim Al Shal Ovi? I mean, an Ovi Kochavim is not Chayiv and Maser. So what's going on? He says here, this is already Rashi, a Jew acquired 2 batches of produce, each of which had been grown by a different Oved Avodah Zarah in Eretz Yisrael. The Brisa follows the view that the ownership of the Akum, of land in Eretz Yisrael, is lo mafkia midei meiser. It does not exempt produce grown from tithing the zachiv of maser. So, if the idolater produces grains in Eretz Yisrael, although he does not have to tithe it himself, he's part of a maser. But the Jew who buys this product is obligated to be mafresh maser. So he can be mafresh from one batch onto the other. And likewise, mishal kusiyim al shal kusiyim, umishal kol al shal kol. Ah, okay. This is Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Mishal kol al shal kol. A Jew may separate truma from produce that belong to one of these sources, to a Jew, to a kusi, or to an ako, for produce that belong to any of the other sources. Each truma separated from the produce grown by an idolater is valid for that which was grown by a Jew. So even though this was owned by a goy, but ein kinyan akum lafkia midei maser be'eretz Yisrael, that has the same status as that which was grown by a Jew, and therefore he can be mafresh from one or the other. However, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon Omerim, Tormim Mishal Yisrael Shal Yisrael, Mishal Akum Shal Akum, Mishal Kusim Shal Kusim, Avalo Mishal Yisrael Al Shal Ovdei Kachavim Mishal Kusim, Velo Mishal Ovdei Kachavim Mishal Kusim Al Shal Yisrael. One may not take truma from the produce of a Jew for the produce of idolaters or kusim, or from the produce of idolaters or kusim for the sake of the produce of a Jew. The reason for this is that a pile of grain, and now we're talking about meruach, and then he has to smooth it out after he winnows it. If it was done by an idolater or by a kusi, it now is potter from maser. So now we're saying that meruach akum, or meruach kusi for that matter, poter min maser, just like we said about meruach hegdesh. Now, if it's exempt from maser, in which case we apply the rule that you cannot take truma from produce that is subject, that is tevel, on behalf of produce that's not tevel, or vice versa. So as far as Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi, etc., they maintain that grain smoothed out by an idolater is subject to tithing. So that's what the Gemara says here, Kitanoi, whether or not the Meruach Akum is a poter, is subject to a machlokes tanoi. And on the next Amud, which Amir Shem will learn tomorrow, we have a discussion about challah. What happens in order to be mechayev challah, just like in Maser we need meruach, in challah the parallel is going to be gilgul isa, which means when you knead the dough after you pour the water onto the flour. And the question is whether gilgul hegdesh is a poter, whether gilgul akum is a poter, and therefore you don't have tevel lechala, and if you don't have tevel lechala, it's hafrasha min achiv al ptur, and that's not a valid hafrasha. So it's so interesting that we're learning Menachos here, and it's as if at this point we're learning Zeraim. We're learning about Gilgul Isa for Chala. We're learning about Meruach as far as the Chiv Trumas Amasus is concerned. That's why they call it Talmud Bavli, because it's mixed up with everything. We had so much about tzitzis, about tefillin, about mezuzah, and now we're studying Zeraim. And we had also a lot of taros also with kalim and different discussions about what's makabel tuma, what's not makabel tuma, ochlin, mashkin, so forth and so on. That's the nature of Talmud Bav. Okay then, so I wish you a great day, and B'lineda tomorrow, same time, same station. Yeah.